The lost letter that could reshape the church before his passing, Pope Francis, a man celebrated not just for his theological intellect, but his human touch, left behind something far more profound than doctrine. He left behind a letter. Hidden within the Vatican's most guarded archives, this handwritten message was addressed to none other than Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle, a name that has quietly echoed through the highest chambers of the Catholic Church for years. When news of its discovery surfaced after Francis's death, the world didn't just gasp, it paused. This wasn't a ceremonial farewell or a formal instruction, but something infinitely more personal. The letter, written in the Pope's unmistakable script, is now sending shockwaves through the global Catholic community. Why? Because embedded within its folds is not just mentorship, but the possibility of a quiet succession plan, a spiritual nod, a prophetic whisper. The question on every theologian's lips, did Pope Francis quietly choose his successor, not through pomp and power, but through the intimacy of a pen and parchment? Tagle, a humble servant from Manila, suddenly finds himself at the center of global attention. And as faithful followers, clergy, and Vatican insiders begin dissecting every word of this intimate correspondence, a new kind of question arises. Was this letter meant to shape the heart of one man, or was it always a divine message meant for the entire church? Stay with us, because this story is not just about a letter. It's about the future of Catholicism, the legacy of Pope Francis, and the rise of a man who just might be the spiritual compass of the next generation. If you haven't subscribed yet, do so now, because what's coming next might just change how you see the church forever. Timing, discovery, and the Vatican's silent thunder. The timing of the letter's discovery wasn't just uncanny, it felt orchestrated by divine foresight. Hours after Pope Francis passed away, following complications from pneumonia and a chronic lung infection, Vatican officials uncovered the sealed envelope buried deep in the papal archives. Inside was the message addressed to Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle, written in the familiar curvature of Francis's own hand. It wasn't coincidence. It was timing. Francis, a man known for his strategic mind and unwavering concern for the church's future, had always been a planner. He once said the church must move like water, patient, persistent, and precise. So why was this letter hidden? Why now? According to Vatican insiders, Francis wanted the message to be revealed not during the noise of his life, but in the silence of his absence. That's when its meaning would echo loudest. The content wasn't filled with edicts or titles, it brimmed with something more powerful: trust, mentorship. A subtle transfer of spiritual weight. In a church rocked by scandal, division, and a shifting global landscape, the timing of this letter's revelation couldn't be more crucial. As questions about the next phase of leadership swirl through cardinals' meetings and secret conclave talks, Francis's letter emerges not as a political play, but a whisper of legacy. And within that whisper is a name: Tagle. For years, he stood by Francis's side during missions and moments that defined a generation of Catholic evolution. But now, it seems the torch wasn't just symbolically passed, it may have been spiritually handed over. So as the Vatican begins to stir under the weight of a new era, many wonder, was this letter blueprint left behind by a man who always saw beyond the moment? Keep watching, because the deeper we go into this message, the clearer it becomes. This wasn't just about Cardinal Tagle, this was Pope Francis's final act of guidance, unfolding long after his final breath. Don't forget to subscribe, because in the next segment, we uncover how a humble boy from Manila came to earn the trust of the most progressive pope in modern history. From the streets of Manila to the halls of the Vatican, Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle's story didn't begin in the grandeur of Vatican halls or academic lecture rooms. It began in the bustling, chaotic streets of Manila, where faith wasn't recited from ornate pulpits, but lived in quiet acts of sacrifice. Raised in a modest family where faith and service were part of everyday life, Tagle grew up witnessing suffering, resilience, and the raw reality of poverty. And that foundation would shape him into a different kind of leader, one not obsessed with status, but devoted to people. When Pope Francis first met Tagle, it wasn't the cardinal's resume that impressed him, it was his heart. Both men shared a kindred spirit born from similar roots, humble beginnings, a heart for the poor, and an unshakable belief that the Church must walk with the people, not above them. Tagle wasn't a climber in the Vatican bureaucracy. He was a listener, a servant, a shepherd. It didn't take long for Francis to take notice. He saw in Tagle not just a colleague but a reflection of himself. Over time, Francis entrusted him with increasingly significant responsibilities, most notably appointing him in 2019 to lead the Congregation for the Evangelization of Peoples, an influential arm of the Church's global mission. This was more than a promotion. It was an anointing of sorts, a clear signal to the Church that this man was different, and that his voice would carry further than the pulpit. The bond between the two only deepened, with Tagle frequently appearing alongside Francis during key international visits and crisis moments. His presence wasn't loud, but it was undeniable. Francis once remarked privately, "He leads with his heart, not his rank." And in the corridors of power where political ambition often outweighs pastoral care, that made Tagle stand out like a beacon. It is this bond, this quiet mentorship that makes the lost letter even more significant. Because now the world is seeing what Francis saw all along. Inside the letter, wisdom, not decree. The letter Pope Francis left behind was not filled with formal language or political maneuvering. It was a quiet meditation on leadership, service, and the Church's path forward. Handwritten in a tone of deep reflection, the letter began with a line that stilled the room. The Church does not belong to those who seek power. It belongs to those who serve. In that one sentence, Francis shattered centuries of hierarchical interpretation, shifting focus from control to compassion. The letter made no official pronouncement, no papal endorsement by name, but its content spoke volumes. It acknowledged Tagle's unique gift, an ability to understand the hearts of the people. "Luis, never lose that," the Pope wrote. "The future needs leaders who carry mercy in both hands." The tone was neither commanding nor passive. It was deeply intentional. Throughout the message, Francis emphasized humility, a listening church, and the importance of leading with love, not fear. He referenced the global issues they both championed: poverty, migration, environmental destruction, stating that leadership must transcend dogma and enter the realm of living ministry. But the most powerful line came near the end. "May you walk forward not with fear, but with faith." It was a blessing, a charge, a gentle passing of the torch without the weight of expectation. The letter is now being read in seminaries, parishes, and Vatican offices as not just a private message, but a possible blueprint for the Church's next era. It is being interpreted as Francis's final sermon, one delivered in silence, designed to echo for generations, and it is changing everything. Because in a church where words are often guarded and formal, this letter was unfiltered, raw, and filled with the spirit of a man who believed that love, true love, is the highest form of authority. "He has my spirit," the words that changed everything for years. One phrase had circulated quietly through Catholic circles, a line Francis had once uttered that didn't draw much attention until now. "Tagle carries my spirit." At the time, it was seen as a passing compliment, a nod of approval from a mentor to a trusted ally. But in the aftermath of the letter's revelation, those 5 words now carry prophetic weight. Because in the world of the papacy, where every word is measured and every gesture intentional, such a declaration is never just offhanded, it's legacy. Insiders now point to years of subtle signals from Francis, how Tagle was consistently chosen for critical roles, sent on global missions, and trusted with sensitive matters. The pattern was clear to those paying attention. He wasn't being elevated, he was being prepared. He understands both God's people and God's purpose, Francis once told a close advisor. And now, as scholars revisit those quiet moments with fresh perspective, they see the roadmap Francis was laying all along. The phrase "He has my spirit" now feels like the cornerstone of a spiritual endorsement. And though it lacks the legal authority of a papal decree, it carries something even stronger in the eyes of the faithful: moral authority.
This isn't about inheritance of power. It's about the continuity of vision. Francis wasn't crowning a successor. He was anointing a guide. And in the eyes of 1 billion Catholics watching from pews, cathedrals, and television screens, that means everything. It begs the question, can a spiritual successor carry more weight than an official one? For those who believe in legacy over title, the answer is clear. And as the Church looks to its next chapter, those 5 words are now shaping hearts, hopes, and history. A blueprint between the lines to the untrained eye, the letter might appear simple, a personal note between 2 men of faith. But to those who understand the nuance of Vatican communication, it reads like a carefully coded blueprint. Francis didn't say, "You will be Pope," but he did say, "You know the way forward." That distinction matters, because in a church built on centuries of tradition, any deviation from protocol is itself a profound statement. The Pope knew he was navigating a divided institution, one torn between tradition and transformation, and so he chose a path that honored both, a personal letter filled with spiritual instruction, released only when it would speak the loudest after his death. Francis urged Tagle to remember that leadership is service, not status. "Let love guide you, not ambition," he wrote, a line that Vatican analysts now cite as the heart of the message. The letter was not about claiming a throne, it was about carrying a torch lit by decades of struggle, reform, and relentless advocacy for the poor and marginalized. Francis understood that the next leader would need more than knowledge, he would need courage, and that courage, he believed, resided in Tagle. This wasn't about politics or papal succession in the legal sense. It was about shaping the spiritual DNA of the Church for the next century. A passing not of a crown, but of a conviction. And in that silent gesture, Francis may have done something far more powerful than naming a successor. He created one in spirit. Tagle's response, humility over hype. When the letter finally reached Cardinal Tagle, his reaction was exactly what Pope Francis would have hoped for. He didn't summon a press conference, he didn't make veiled announcements or seek the spotlight. Instead, he disappeared into prayer. He reportedly told a close friend, "I am just a servant of God, offering no further comment." There were no grand statements, no grasping for validation, just quiet reflection. And that, more than anything, revealed the kind of man Tagle is. In a world obsessed with power, here stood a man who believed in purpose. Leadership is not about titles, it's about carrying the weight of others. He once said in a homily, of others. He once carrying the weight of others, he once said in a homily, and now with this letter in hand, he seemed to embody those words. Sources close to the Cardinal say he spent days in solitude, not strategizing but listening for divine guidance. He continued his daily work, stayed active in humanitarian missions, and avoided any hints of ambition. While the world speculated, Tagle stayed grounded, and that restraint, that refusal to politicize a sacred moment, only deepened the belief that he was the right man for this moment, because sometimes the most powerful thing a leader can do is nothing. Just listen, just serve. And in doing so, remind the world what true humility looks like in action. About the Church at a crossroads, the Catholic Church today finds itself on a precipice, teetering between the solidity of ancient traditions and the ancient traditions and 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 ancient traditions.
With scandals shaking its moral foundation, membership dwindling in the West, and calls for inclusivity growing louder across the globe, it's clear the institution is at a historic crossroads. And it is at this fragile moment that Pope Francis's letter emerges like a compass, guiding the faithful towards something deeper. The Church must not fear change when it serves love and truth. Francis once said, and that sentiment is embedded in every line of the letter to Tagle. It's not just a personal message, it's a roadmap for navigating crisis with courage. Francis's vision was never about tearing down the Church. It was about opening its windows wider, letting in the voices of the marginalized, the youth, the forgotten. Tagle, with his deep cultural roots and global perspective, represents a bridge between continents, ideologies, and generations. He doesn't lecture from pulpits, he walks among people. That's why his potential leadership matters now more than ever. Because the church doesn't just need a pope, it needs a healer, a listener, a builder. And with Francis gone, the weight of that calling now rests on the shoulders of one man, whether he wants it or not. Vatican divided, support and resistance. As the contents of Pope Francis's letter spread through Vatican corridors, it didn't just inspire, it divided. Progressive cardinals and younger clergy rallied behind the message, seeing in Tagle a continuation of Francis's compassionate mission. But conservative factions bristled, fearing that his rise could mean irreversible change. For many in the old guard, Tagle's emphasis on inclusion, social justice, and interfaith dialogue is unsettling. We must protect the timeless truths of the Church, one insider remarked anonymously, revealing a growing resistance among traditionalists. Behind closed doors, alliances are forming, and discussions about the next conclave have already begun. The letter, while unofficial, has become a lightning rod, uniting reformers and alarming purists. Yet through all the speculation and power plays, Tagle remains silent. He serves where he's called. That's what sets him apart. And that's why the Vatican is at war with itself. Because Tagle doesn't fit the mold. He breaks it. And for some, that's terrifying. For others, it's exactly what the Church needs. A legacy carried forward. Whether or not Cardinal Tagle ever wears the papal ring, his influence is already reshaping the global Church. His commitment to service, his voice for the poor, his bridge building across faiths, these are not just policies, they are values. Values Pope Francis believed in and passed on, not through decree, but through trust. The letter wasn't a coronation, it was a calling. And Tagle, with quiet strength, has answered. In a world fractured by division, his leadership offers something rare. Hope. His message is simple yet profound. Faith must live where people live, in their struggles, in their fears, in their love. And so, as the dust settles around the legacy of Pope Francis, one thing is certain. The Church's future may not be declared in conclaves, but written in letters passed from one heart to another. If this story moved you, subscribe now, because in the next chapter we'll uncover how faith continues to shape the world in ways we never expected.